Hello folks, Dick Fairburn here. It's kind of hard to get away from the SIG P320 unfolding disaster, I called it. The video that I posted last Friday, my normal weekly long form video, dealt with the SIG 320 controversy. I didn't really call it unsafe. The FBI did, in a way, and I quoted their report rather extensively. Since last week, several more training facilities, several more police departments have started to drop this P320. One thing I noticed in the comments from the last week's video, there's still a very sizable number of very, very vocal SIG supporters out there. So this week I want to talk about brand loyalty. Now, we all have favorites in the things we buy and the things we enjoy in our lives. Brand loyalty can come from actual experiences that we've had with products. They can even be inherited from our parents and our friends. But shouldn't brand loyalty be based on, at least some basis, be based in logic? And when you see something quite contrary to what you normally believe, you really ought to listen to that little voice, that little guy on your shoulder who's whispering in your ear and saying, yeah, I know you like this, but there's something wrong here. So stick around. I'm going to tell you some kind of extreme examples of brand loyalty that I've seen over the years and what I've developed in my life as it relates to guns and ammo and the things that our kind of folks mess with. Now, brand loyalty is absolutely one of the most valuable commodities any product can achieve. I mean, it's the goal of everything from cornflakes to Mercedes-Benz cars. But those of us with some common sense may change our minds when reality shows us that brand loyalty we've had might be wrong. Early in my life, here's an example. My dad was a Chevy man. Now, my first car, 1971, was a 1965 Plymouth Fury, because that was all I could afford at first. But as soon as I could, I traded up to a 1967 Chevy Impala. I wanted a 327, but I had to settle for the 283 V8. That was the first in a long string of Chevys I owned, both used and new. And along the way, I can honestly say I had problems with every single Chevrolet I ever owned. And my dad started having problems with his Chevys as well. So we both eventually drifted away. Now, my first new car after I got married was a cute little Chevy Vega station wagon. Yeah, I can hear some of you laughing. What a piece of crap. Now, my old Plymouth, as I recall, had been a very reliable car. Just a little slant 6 Fury 1 plain car. But it just ran and ran. So when that Vega suffered a rather serious problem, a cracked engine block, I went to Mopar. Since then, I have almost exclusively driven Mopar vehicles and Jeeps, which is part of that same umbrella now. Now, they haven't been perfect, but I've never had a major problem. Ever. What do I drive now? A Ram pickup and a Jeep Cherokee. Brand loyalty. Based on experience. Now, when I lived in Wyoming, my buddy out there was a Ford guy. Die hard. So we had lots of fun talking over the campfire, which was the better man. The man that drove a Ford or the man that drove a Ram truck. But interestingly enough, along the way, he obtained a father-in-law, and through that father-in-law, he got GM family discount pricing. And ever since then, he's driven GM trucks and cars. So, see, that brand loyalty can change for all kinds of reasons. And the 20% discount's a pretty good reason, I think. With guns, I started out as a Colt guy. my first handgun was a Colt Government Model 45. That was before we called them 1911s, because the only true 1911s of that day were the pistols still being carried by the military. One of my first rifles was a Colt AR-15. Along the way, I obtained a Colt Trooper 357 revolver. Now, this is not the Trooper Mark III that came along later. This was the pre-Python made on the E-frame. After this Trooper 357 went away, that's when they screwed on the vent rib barrel and called that revolver the Python. So it had a phenomenal action, great shooting revolver. That's what I took when I went through firearms instructor school. But by the time I made it to the police academy to be a full-time officer, and my first few years carrying as a full-time officer, I had a Smith & Wesson 686. Great revolver. Never had a problem with it. The reason I had it is because I had traded off that Trooper 357, and I couldn't afford to buy a Python. So the 686 was the next best. While carrying that, the sheriff's department I worked for in Wyoming approved semi-auto pistols. And because of the influence of our captain, who was a personal friend of Warren Barron, who was the president of Beretta USA at the time, and the military had just adopted the Beretta 92 as the M9, we took delivery of Beretta 92F models. They predated slightly the FS, which was I believe, the first civilian variation of the M9 military and what adaptations they had made to it. So that's that conventional double action, single action trigger system. Now, I was a fairly active competitive shooter at the time. I believed very strongly in competing with what I carried on a daily basis, so I competed with the Beretta. And my competition standing suffered. I just didn't get along well with that double action, single action, changeable trigger. Now, the sheriff wouldn't allow us to carry 1911s, but I convinced him that an H&K P7 squeeze cocker 9mm pistol was perfectly safe. And it had the consistent trigger that I was looking for. My competition scores went up, and I have loved H&K pistols ever since. I think they're some of the most ergonomic, reliable, accurate pistols you can get. Their rifles, not so much. I never really fell in love with them. Now, Smith & Wesson is a company that has also had great brand loyalty over the years. I became a police firearms instructor here in Illinois in 1978. And part of doing that was to be qualified to teach what Illinois called the 24-hour mandatory firearms training course. Part-time police officers prior to this time in Illinois could just be appointed by the sheriff or the police chief and given a gun and a badge and sent out on the street with no training. This required anyone who was going to be armed to take a 24-hour mandatory course in the law and the use of firearms. We taught this through a local junior college, and there were quite a few actually, instructors around the state. So depending where you live, different folks would teach classes on a, say, 3 or 4 times a year schedule. So if we had somebody local who needed to get through the 24-hour course and we didn't have a class coming up soon, we would send them to a guy who was neighboring about 45 miles away. He was a captain in a police department there. And we noticed that several of the people we sent there got sent home because part of this class was a safety inspection of whatever weapon you brought. And some of the people we sent up there seemed to have, according to him, unsafe revolvers that he wouldn't allow on his range. And not only us, but other folks who had sent students to him realized that, yeah, according to him, if it wasn't a Smith & Wesson, it wasn't safe. So if you had a Ruger or a Colt revolver, he wouldn't let you train. Now, we eventually brought this to the attention of the state police training board, called ILETSB here, and they tuned him up a little bit. Brand loyalty. Now, I'm still a Colt guy. A number of years ago, Colt had kind of been out of the gun business as far as cops and civilians were concerned. You hardly ever saw them in the gun stores. One of their marketing guys called me and he said, hey, you're writing for Police One website and it sounds like you kind of like Colt stuff. We've got enough production capability now to try to get back in the law enforcement market, but would you be willing to review some guns for us? Love to. I'm a Colt guy. Hey. So I reviewed their stuff. And as I had always known, Colt is quality stuff. Now, Colt has had ups and downs with the quality of their weapons. So has Smith & Wesson, so has almost everyone else. But overall, Colt is a quality product. When I retired in 2021 as a public safety director, I'm a police chief, so I'm not out there wrestling around and getting dirty. But when I retired, my last pistol was a Colt Lightweight Commander 45, and in the trunk of my car I had a Colt M4 patrol rifle. I'm still a Colt guy, and I don't apologize for it. When it comes to shotguns, I always liked Ithacas. I had an Ithaca Model 37 Deer Slayer for deer hunting here in Illinois. And part of the reason I got it was that's what our police department had for riot guns, was Ithaca Model 37, 20-inch, no choke, functional. Loved them. When I got back into bird hunting, when I got my Brittany's that you see on the end of my videos, I still had that old Ithaca 37. I had the deer barrel for it. I had a vent rib bird barrel for it. But I've always liked side-by-side shotguns too. So I went looking around, and over the course of a year or so, I found a couple of really sweet pre-war, that's pre-World War II, new Ithaca doubles. So I got a side-by-side 16 gauge and a side-by-side 20 gauge. The first lever action I ever owned was an Ithaca Model 72 saddle gun. Still got it. Wasn't made by Ithaca, it was made in West Germany. But it's a nice little 22 lever action. Bolt action hunting rifles, gone through Rugers, gone through Winchesters, settled in as Remington 700s I thought were the best you could get. Reliable accuracy, reliable action. Came time to get a bigger gun for hunting moose and elk and things like that in Wyoming. I had a buddy who has become very enamored of the Tikka rifles. He had Tikka T3 Light and 300 short mag, and it shot so great he bought another one for his son. And several of his friends in Wyoming who, I need to get a new rifle that's a little bit better. And he goes, get a Tikka. They shoot minute of angle, they're great, they're reliable, they're reasonably priced. They're lightweight to carry. So I bought a Tikka 338 Winchester Magnum. They don't even chamber it in that caliber anymore. Now, that rifle, the way I first had it set up with a rather small scope, only weighed 7 pounds. 338 Winchester Magnum. Had a bit of recoil. So I put a Limb Saver recoil pad on it. They had one made to fit. Just screw it right on there. I swear it took half the recoil out of that rifle. Now, the only thing I've killed with it so far is a moose. And it was, if I ever get my basement book back together, you'll see the moose on the wall back there in my earlier videos, that moose. That was the largest moose killed in Wyoming the year I got it. It got #1 in the Wyoming Outfitters competition. I like it. I'm taking it elk hunting next year. So while I still have Remington rifles, that Tikka moved me off of that kind of brand loyalty. If I ever buy another caliber, chances are I'm going to go with the Tikka. Now in lever actions, I always liked the Winchesters. I've had a number of them over the years. The ones I have now, I have two in the 1892 pattern. One, I have 4570 and 1886. They're not actually Winchesters, they were made by Browning. Now those rifles were designed by John Moses Browning, and that's why the Browning Company brought them out as limited runs back in the 80s. And I've mentioned in my lever gun articles that, I don't even have a 30-30 anymore. I've gone through several of them, but I just never did really like the Winchester 94 action. It kind of, instead of a smooth action, it's got kind of a and then a There's kind of a jerk in the middle of it. Now you can work those out by either sitting there and working it a million times. Cowboy buddy of mine, we tore his 94 down, put in some lapping compound, sit there and cycled it for half an hour, cleaned it back out, oiled it up good. Really smoothed it out. But it's still just not as good as the 86 or the 92 in my opinion, even though they're all designed by John Browning. So I just bought a Marlin 3030, 336. I'll have it here in a couple of days. And I'll do a video on how I'm going to set it up. I think that's a good truck gun to have with you just about all the time. It's going to kill anything you need to kill, from bad guys up to elk if you had to. And no matter where you go with it, you're not going to be spread-eagled on your car being arrested by the police because you have one of those terrible illegal black assault rifles. So, lever guns, Browning designs. If Winchester makes them, that's fine. I just don't like the 94 that much. I'm wrong, because there's been about 7 or 8 million of them made, but we have our preferences. Now, I was always loyal to Federal ammunition. And at one point I was reloading some loads in .223 caliber. I have a Kimber .223 rifle that's extremely accurate. And I noticed on one test load, and these were working up some loads with a new bullet, and they were pretty light loads, but all of a sudden you get that kind of odd sound and a little bit of gassiness in your face. And if you're one of those guys that have tried to load your loads up to the absolute maximum and you pierce a primer, that's the feeling you get. Your bolt let a little gas out. When I thought, this is a very light load, why did that happen? So I ejected the case, picked it up, and indeed the primer had pierced. And when a primer pierces from high pressure, it pierces where the firing pin puts the dent. That dent will blow a hole and vent out gas. This primer pierced on the outer edge, out on the circumference of the primer, and the edges were still round, showing that it did not have high pressure. Wow, what a fluke. A couple of rounds later, it did it again. Now, I was writing for magazines at the time, so I called the contact I had at Federal and told him what was going on. And he kind of stuttered on the other end of the phone. Yeah, we call that stress corrosion. It's where the metal cup has been bent, and sometimes that bending process can initiate a process that can cause corrosion and create a pinhole. It's neutralized chemically, he told me, but we've had problems with a few. And then he asked me a question. He said, did it cut the breech face of your bolt? I hadn't thought of that. So I pulled the bolt out of that Kimber, and lo and behold, there were 2 serious divots cut into it by those primers piercing and letting that high pressure gas out. So Federal sent me 5,000 more primers to apologize, and they had me send the rifle back to Kimber. Now, this is Kimber of Oregon before 1991. And Kimber put a new bolt in it at Federal's expense. So I kept using Federal stuff because their customer service was the norm for what I've seen in the gun industry. They bent over backwards to make the rifle right, sent me a bunch of primers saying they're sorry. No big deal, it happens. Fast forward about 20 some years, I'm working up loads in a .280 Remington for a deer hunt in Wyoming. And I had a Federal primer pierce on that outer circumference again. I gave a buddy my Federal primers and traded him for Winchesters. I've never used Federal primers again. And I won't. Now, I've still got a lot of Federal ammo around, and I'm not afraid to use it at all. But I have a problem with their primer components right now. So that brand loyalty got damaged by actual experience that I had. Now, recently I did a video with my friend Jeff Hoffman at Black Hills Ammunition. We met being sent there by SWAT magazine to meet him and see what he was doing very early in the life of Black Hills Ammunition. And Black Hills Ammunition, in my opinion, is second to none. Now, we're friends, but that's not why I say that. It's my experience with what they do. It's their reputation with what other people think of Black Hills Ammunition. It's the fact that probably close to half their production now goes into military loads. And not common military loads, but very specialized loads going to very specialized warfighters. And he has a new load that is just in the process of being verified and accepted by the military that he's going to announce here in a few weeks, and I'll tell you what this new, it's going to be a pistol round. And it's going to be a very interesting cartridge. It's going to be used by our warfighters. So I'll tell you about that. So that brand loyalty that I have is based on a personal knowledge of their ammunition and how they make it. Now, they don't make all the kinds of ammunition I need by any means. But if they make something I want, they are my first choice. I'll talk about optics. Rifle scopes, binoculars, spotting scopes, things like that. I learned a long time ago that when it gets to something made from glass, you pretty much get what you pay for. There are good values out there. There aren't really too many bargains. If you get something for low dollar, you're generally getting lower quality. I started out in photography. I actually took junior college photography classes when I was in junior high school. I got my minor in photography when I got a bachelor's degree. And after going through several brands of cameras and lenses, I finally figured out that if it's not a Nikon or a Canon, it's really not worth throwing your money away. So I'm talking into a Canon camera right now. My one buddy at the university where I went, he's a diehard Nikon fan. He wouldn't have a camera made by Canon for, well, if you gave it to him, I'm not sure he would have it. And his stuff is every bit as good as mine. It took me longer to learn about that get what you pay for problem with glass when it came to gun and hunting optics. I just couldn't see the money that things like Redfields and loopholes were costing when I started out in the 70s. I originally used Weaver rifle scopes, partially because they were made from, the tubes were made from steel, not aluminum, and I figured that had to be a lot stronger. Of course, they would also rust. When Weaver went out of business, I swapped over to Bushnell, and I had a lot of good luck with Bushnell scopes. And Bushnell, like Loophole, like other companies, they have lower priced optics all the way up to, in Bushnell's case, the Bosch and Loom series is the top end of their optics line, and they're pretty classy stuff. For one of the magazines that I was writing for in 1991, it just so happened in 1 year I got a tour at 3 rifle scope factories: Loophole, Burris, and Redfield. And Redfield only lasted a couple years after that. They were, I guess, on the verge of going out of business then. Well, all 3 of them offered me optics at a heck of a discount as a gun writer. And gun writers used to get bodacious discounts from optics manufacturers. My buddy in Wyoming, who is a guide, he guides for grizzlies and sheep hunters in Alaska. Loophole offers a very hefty guide discount because they, when you go hunting and you see your guides carrying the Loophole, that's great advertising for Loophole or Burris or whoever does that. So based on that big discount, I bought a Loophole scope. I was amazed at the difference. I mean, setting it side by side with a similar Bushnell, it's like somebody turned the lights on. This thing is twice as bright. The adjustments, if I went up 4 clicks to move my bullet impact an inch, it went an inch. With the Bushnells, sometimes it went an inch, sometimes it didn't. Sometimes it wouldn't hardly move at all, and then it would go twice as far. They're just not as well made internally or optically. But I didn't really have anything against Bushnell. I just was at a point in my life where I could afford better now, and I decided I was worth better. Then I was asked to do a review of LVPOs, before we called them that, low variable power optics. 1 to 4s, 1 to 6s, to be used on patrol rifles, designated marksman rifles, things like that. I think I ended up with about 12 different models, and I did not shoot them all. But I had a standard, and what I would do is I took a board and put some mounts on there, and I would mount them side by side with my standard. And then I took photographs through them in bright daylight, very dim conditions at dusk, even nighttime under artificial lighting. And you're seeing how bright these scopes are, how well their reticles showed up. Not all had lighted reticles. I think it was a pretty good test. One of the scopes was from Bushnell. And as soon as I put it in the mounts and started playing with it, I know, you use the ocular lens by your eye to focus the reticle. It does not focus the image of the scope, it focuses the reticle itself. And that's individual to you, whether you wear glasses or not, and things like that. So I got it mounted, used the ocular lens, focused on the reticle, and then zoomed it from 1, I believe it was a 1 to 6, zoomed it up to 6, and both the reticle and the image itself went completely out of focus. Completely. And with most rifle scopes, you can't adjust the image focus unless it has an adjustable objective or a side focus knob. And even then, you can hardly tell the difference in image focus. You're just adjusting parallax, really. Well, this is wrong. So I tried it 2 or 3 times, and every time you zoomed from high to low or low to high, this thing would go in and out of focus, both optically and reticle. So I sent an email to the media rep and I said, hey, I got this scope and here's what it's doing. He very quickly said, pack it up, send it back. I'll see what's going on. We'll get you another one to test. Well, before I could even get it in the box, within an hour or so later, I checked my email. I noticed here's another email from Bushnell. So I opened it up to see what's going on. This was an internal email from the media guy to apparently one of their tech guys. Well, when the tech guy replied internally, apparently he clicked the button that said send all. Because the email I got said, well, this dumbass is a cop. He probably looking in the wrong end of the scope. They don't even know how to use them. We all have egos. Mine got bruised. I emailed the Bushnell guy and I said, packing it up now, send it back. Don't bother to send me a new one. Right or wrong, they had a problem and he was willing to fix it. But that internal attitude in their company just set me off. Brand loyalty, gone. And you know, I'd used Bushnell binoculars as well. Now I had my camera buddy, the Nikon guy I mentioned. He was out in Wyoming one time on a deer hunt, and we were out way before sunrise, waiting over a hay meadow to see what deer are out in there when the sun comes up. I had my Bushnell 7x50 rubber armored first-rate binoculars. He had this pair of binoculars that folded up the size of a pack of cigarettes that he pulled out of his pocket, opened up like this. I'm looking through the binoculars and I said, well, I can see 4 deer out there, but there's not enough light to see if they're bucks or does. He holds these tiny ones up and he goes, well, there's a 2-point buck, a 4-point buck, and the others are does. And I'm saying, you can't tell that with those little dime store binoculars. So he hands them over. Well, they're really little, but they're not dime store binoculars. They're Leicas. And I could count the points on these deer in this tiny little set of Leicas when I couldn't even tell if it was a buck at all in the much bigger, which theoretically brighter 7x50 Bushnells. He got me a set of those Leicas. I've still got them. They fold up in my pocket. They've been bucked off horses. They've been bucked off four-wheelers. They've been knocked out of alignment. I send them back to Leica. I think that Leica has put them back in alignment 3 times. They only charged me once. Those little binoculars have had a very hard life, and they're still one of the best ones I have. When it came time to spend the money for a set of laser binoculars, what do you think I bought? Leica, as well as another handheld Leica laser rangefinder. Brand loyalty based on performance. Now, as spotting scopes go, I can't afford a Leica spotting scope. So I have a Leupold. A number of years ago, Leupold made the coolest little sexiest spotting scope I've ever seen. A friend had one in Wyoming. That's all the bigger it is. This little case that protects it. This is a 25x50 spotting scope. It has it came either 20 or 25. It has the coolest little tripod that the legs screw inside of each other, so this tiny little package could go in your backpack. It only weighs, I don't know, 2.5, 3 pounds for the tripod and the scope. I lusted after one for years. I found one on eBay one time and probably paid more than I should have to get it. And when I got it, it's great. It's light, it's 25 power, it's sharp, but it was just a little hazy, it seemed. So I called Loophole and they said, we'll send it back. And this is 25-year-old, maybe more by that time, sliding scope, and I'm not the original owner. About 2 or 3 weeks later, it came back in UPS, and they said, yeah, well, you had a little fungus on the inside of the front objective lens, so we've replaced it under warranty, no charge, and have a nice day. Lifetime warranty on something that I didn't buy new. That's the kind of customer service I've seen in the gun industry. And when I say gun industry, I mean the guns, I mean the ammunition, the reloading components, the optics we use, and everything else. I've got some examples of bad things. I've changed my mind on things over the years. And most of the way I've changed my mind is because I just could afford to get better and figured out that you truly do get what you pay for. I said in the SIG video a week ago that SIG has brand loyalty second to none. I've never seen another gun industry entity with that kind of brand loyalty. And one of the biggest catchphrases you see is, it is the Swiss watch of pistols. Now, if you're familiar with the original Swiss-made P210 pistol, a 9mm, single action, used by their military, their police, this was a target-grade weapon. Jeff Cooper thought the SIG P210 was one of the finest pistols he'd ever seen, except it was a 9mm. They're incredibly easy to shoot. They're incredibly accurate. It's a Swiss watch of pistols. Beyond the 210, the 220 through the 229 pistols, and every pistol's had little minor problems. I found that they're a little bit difficult for some people to shoot because the bore axis sits up high above the web of your hand, so you get more muzzle flip on it. But those metal framed SIG pistols were high quality pistols. But the way SIG has been handling this P320 controversy can only be described as a debacle. I did a short a couple of nights ago talking about a new press release that came out. Not necessarily twisting words, but spinning back to their old original story. There could never possibly be anything wrong with the P320. Anybody who says there's anything wrong with it is wrong. It is severely damaging their brand loyalty. And they just don't even seem to understand that. So I think brand loyalty in this industry is cool. It's interesting to have people say why they like a Winchester, or why they like a Smith & Wesson, or why they like Hornady ammunition. And it's cool to hear their stories. And it's usually based on their own personal, usually very positive experience with a product. That's where brand loyalty should come from. Your experience and a logical thought process. Time will tell what's going to happen to SIG and their brand loyalty, which was second to none. I don't think it is anymore. Folks, if you like these videos, I ask you to subscribe, resubscribe, give me a thumbs up, a like. Everything helps. Whatever you do out there, folks, you judge what you want based on your experience. And if you believe in that product, believe in that product. But if the world starts telling you that there's something wrong with it, listen. And then make up your own mind. Whatever you do, hey, y'all be safe out there. Okay, we got them both here now. You ready? Bud got one. Ginger got one. Oh, she missed it. She usually gets them, doesn't she, Bud? Okay, girl, last one. You ready? You ready? Yeah! That's all there is till next time.